Let's get one thing straight. Better Call Saul, that's a good show, okay? Season 3, that's how you do a slow burn. That's how you do it, okay? Great season. But, but, I see this overglorification of the show as if it's flawless. Better Call Saul, like all television, is not flawless, and I see a lot of people who are weary to give this show any criticism because they're afraid they're going to get ridiculed because people are going to say, "Oh, you just don't understand the art of the slow burn. This show is not for you. Perhaps you should go watch Big Bang Theory because you're a big dummy." But that's just simply not true. Better Call Saul has its problems, and I'm about to vocalize them in the context of Season 4. Of course, I'm also going to give my praise of Season 4. It is a critical analysis, it's a review. I'm going to give you both the good and the bad, but let's start with the bad. Let's just get it out in the open. And listen, if you do disagree with me, I want you to at least hear me out, and if you still disagree with me, explain why in the comments below. But anyways, the problem with Better Call Saul Season 4 has everything to do with plot structure. For the past 3 seasons, Better Call Saul has followed the very basic A plot B plot structure, or more fancily called 2 lines, no waiting. And what this does is that it takes 2 plots, the A plot being Jimmy McGill and the B plot being Mike Ehrmantraut, and it just simply jumps between the two so we could follow both stories at sort of an even pace, although typically the A plot gets a little more attention, of course. And then, of course, we have our supporting cast, and you might argue that they have their own plots, but in a lot of ways, these are subplots that support our main protagonist. For example, Kim's whole thing with Mesa Verde trying to get those clients was the main driving force in Jimmy switching those 2 numbers on Chuck's documents, which we all know caused a very big cataclysmic turn of events. So yeah, these are very much subplots. But anyways, this structure has shown great success for Better Call Saul in the past, the only real minor complaint being that these 2 plot lines seem way too disconnected to be on the same show. They feel like 2 separate shows, and every time that they cross over, it feels like just that, a crossover episode, because that's how disconnected they are. Now let me show you how Season 4 just amplifies this problem into what becomes a glaring problem here. What Season 4 does differently is it takes the likings of Kim, Nacho, and even Gus, and it puts them on the same levels as our protagonists. These characters are no longer just in some kind of subplot that fits into a bigger picture involving Jimmy or Mike. These characters now have their own storylines, and in a way that's a good thing. It shows that these characters are fleshed out to the point where they can carry their own storylines. And it is a good thing later on, but in these first 4 episodes, they're trying to balance all of these storylines at the same time. Even if you count Nacho and Gus as having the same storyline in these first 4 episodes, we still have what we call 4 lines, all waiting. It's what The Walking Dead does when they have 16 episodes to air and only 4 episodes of story. They divide our time amongst the characters so we can only see so much of a character at a time. And by no means was that the intention in the Better Call Saul writing room. It's a much better show, but that is the effect that it gives off. This sort of format does a great disservice to characters like Jimmy and Mike that we now only see 10 to 15 minutes of an episode, and we know this show to be a slow burn. It takes time to create plots organically, and how can you do that when you only see so much of a character? The answer is you don't. It's the reason why we see serialized plots more than overarching ones. For example, Jimmy going to an interview, Jimmy stealing a Hummel, or Mike going to medical or going to group therapy. These all develop their characters, but in no means do they create some sort of cemented plot line. And my problem with that is that character development and plot development are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. But in this situation, how can you when your time is so divided? Really, the only character that benefits from all this is Nacho, because I think he gets the biggest piece of that pie in terms of time division. And since he gets enough screen time, his plotline actually gains momentum, and we see stakes and actual direction there. And for that reason, he had somewhat of an interesting plotline. I only wish that that time was allotted to a character that we have more investment in, a character with more depth like Jimmy. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And that isn't to say that there wasn't some great moments within these first few episodes, like Jimmy just verbally destroying Howard with, I guess that's just your cross to bear, and then Kim also verbally destroying Howard in a later episode. Just wonderful acting there. But once again, these moments don't add up to a meaningful plot line. Still, what should have been an A plot B plot format was turned into a series of B plots. but luckily that was fixed in the episode Quite a Ride. Now, of course, we could talk about that amazing Breaking Bad era cold open. That was excellent. Now, I'm not one that usually goes crazy over the Breaking Bad stuff in Better Call Saul. Like, it was nice to see Gale, but I didn't like jump for joy or anything. But this is necessary to Jimmy's plot, so I was intrigued to see it here. And the attention to detail, the way it was shot on Breaking Bad era cameras, that was all very well done. But what I want to talk about is what was missing from these next few episodes, and that was Nacho. Nacho's nowhere to be found for, I think, the next 4 episodes. And although it was a shame to see that plotline go for a little bit, it was necessary to see all these other plotlines grow, and that's exactly what they did. And even better, they combined Gus and Mike into one storyline, so now we have 3 storylines: Jimmy, Kim, and then Mike and Gus. And you could call this plot structure third line some weighting. You have an A plot, a B plot, and then a third line in the form of Kim, which is a little less significant. But in all of these, there's finally some movement, still some holdback from a huge development, but there's finally some direction being given to this season. For example, Jimmy is finally dipping his toes in the criminal underworld selling burner phones, and it's genuinely interesting to watch. It also helps that the writers on Better Call Saul are masters of visual storytelling, and this is shown through a montage we get that shows Jimmy selling these phones, and it's not even the best montage of the season. I'll talk about that in a minute. And as for Mike, Mike is finally given something to do. He's in charge of a group of Germans that are building Gus's super lab. And to be perfectly honest, this isn't entirely interesting at first, because I think the whole intrigue of this plotline is this idea of what if the Germans step out of line? What if Werner cannot handle the magnitude of this project? And it's those questions that are being asked that keep me intrigued, and I'll keep watching. But I think the lack of an answer to that question for so long is mildly frustrating. There's a threat of conflict, but it does not turn into actual conflict for a while. And I'll come back and I'll talk about this once we get to episode 9 in a minute, because that's really where this does turn into conflict. But now, switching gears back to Jimmy's plotline, I want to fast forward to something stupid and talk about this amazing cold open. It's a montage that acts as a time skip, an incredibly effective time skip. We don't miss a beat in terms of anything. That's what a time skip should do. It shouldn't feel jarring, and it doesn't. And on another note, it explores Kim and Jimmy's relationship in a much more effective way than I think it has been explored in the previous episodes, and it does so in such a short amount of time. It really is just masterful visual storytelling, so I just want to applaud that moment in that episode. And then moving on to the middle of this episode, Kim and Jimmy's plot lines finally come together, and they stay that way for the rest of the season. And I think they're far more compelling together than they are apart, or at least Kim. I think Kim is more interesting when she's with Jimmy and having to deal with him, and it makes for some interesting conflicts. I really wish that they didn't have to come together just because Huel whipped a bag of sandwiches at a cop, but I can't complain too much about that, because that led to them pulling a scam that is one of the funniest things this show has done in a while. Needless to say, it was fun to watch, but this all led to a very interesting plot twist at the end of episode 8. Kim likes the scams, and it keeps her together with Jimmy, at least for another episode. And the reason I'm confused by this is not because it's not written into Kim's character. I know she's fascinated by this side of Jimmy, and she's fascinated by this side of herself. But it just did not feel like the story was being written to that point. It didn't feel like that was where we were going with this story. It was clearly misdirection, but in hindsight, I can't look back to a point in season 4 and say, oh, this makes sense. You want to talk about a good plot twist, we gotta talk about episode 9, where Jimmy is denied his law license, or whatever you call it, because he was too insincere. Now that is a plot twist that I did not see coming for the life of me, and yet I could look back in hindsight and say that that makes perfect sense. Jimmy refused to bring up his dead brother and whatever meaning he had to him for the entire season. And to see that play out and to have actual consequences is what I like to see on this show. And to top it all off, that led to some of the most well-acted scenes of the entire series, as Jimmy flips out, throws his suitcase against the wall, and leads to a fight with Kim, where this culmination of emotions that's been building up between the two this whole season finally bursts out into a fight that's just so well acted. Overall, it was a great episode in terms of the Jimmy plotline. And now this all brings us to the finale, so I'm just going to give my brief opinion on how each plotline ends. and then we'll slap a final score on it. The season 4 finale of Better Call Saul is by far the best episode of the season and perhaps one of the best episodes of the series. It's just firing on all cylinders. It is one of those few instances where I was just as emotionally invested in the B plot as I was the A plot. And with that B plot, I haven't mentioned Lalo yet. He basically just hijacks Nacho's plot. I don't really know where Nacho is at this point, but seeing Lalo is just a breath of fresh air into this cartel plot. He is just so entertaining, and he's just so incredibly well acted by Andy Dalton. Just everything he does is just joy to watch. Like watching him disappear from behind someone and just drop out of the ceiling. It's so ridiculous, but I love it nonetheless. And that cat and mouse he has between Mike and Lalo, it was just so entertaining. And I know we knew Werner was going to die, but it was the journey, not the destination. And even the destination, that final scene with Werner and Mike in the desert was once again well acted. You could tell that Mike really was thinking about this decision he had to make and finally executing it. And I didn't actually think I would feel anything for Werner because he's kind of a moron, but they really did sell it, and I was sold. Very well done. Great conclusion to a kind of a lackluster B plot, but they really did send it off well. It almost makes up for kind of the treading water we get through a lot of the episodes. And then on Jimmy's side, Jimmy is just ruthless, fabricating his own emotions for Chuck's death to get his law license. And seeing that, it's just hard to watch in an entertaining way. It's tough to see Jimmy go down this spiral, and he's making his way to Saul Goodman territory. I mean, the episode ends on him saying, "It's all good, man," and what a way to end the season, really. I mean, it doesn't really fix all the structural problems I have with season 4, but this episode really does give me faith for what the writers are going to do with season 5. Absolutely. So with all this being said, Better Call Saul is still one of the best shows on television in terms of character development, visual storytelling, and cinematography. Unfortunately, all these staples of the show are being applied to a structurally weak and sort of all over the place plot that, although it finds its footing later in the season, is still much weaker than plots we've seen in the past. Because even when I say this season finds its footing, I'm saying that relative to the episodes that came before it. Even when it does find its footing, it's still a bit all over the place and not really focused. So, with that being said, I'm going to give Better Call Saul Season 4 a 6.5 out of 10. It was a 6 out of 10 in my mind, but then I watched the finale and I threw it that extra half point because that really got me excited for where this is going to go. But yeah, overall, that's my opinion on this season. If you disagree with me, you probably do. If you disagree with me, please explain why in the comments below. I openly invite your opinion. If you agree with me, please tell me why. I'd love to hear that. But anyways, if you have any suggestions for what I should review next, please tell me down below. Otherwise, I'll probably just take a hiatus until I find something worth reviewing. And if you want to subscribe, you can do that. But otherwise, that about does it.